Hi, thank you so much for being here. My name is Lauren Weber. I'm a reporter at the Wall Street Journal, where I write about workforce and workplace issues. And it's a broad beat, but my favorite part of what I write about is workforce development and education to workplace pipelines, which is exactly what we're here to talk about. I am going to leave a few minutes at the end for questions, I think, if I can remember to look at my watch. So yeah, please feel free to think about anything you want to ask Scott. And with that, Scott, thank you so much for being here.
It's a pleasure.
You and I have talked a few times over the years, and I'm always interested in hearing your insights about the world of education and workforce, competencies, how we move people into good jobs and get them prepared with the skills that they need. But for those who may not be totally familiar with Western Governors University, why don't you just set the stage a little bit and talk a little bit about the school, what your mission is, who you serve, some of your biggest programs.
Yeah, WGU, we were founded nearly 30 years ago now in 1997 by governors of Western states. I like to joke about the fact that for the amazing vision they had, they should have hired a branding firm. They could have named it something different, especially since we have more students in the East now than we do in the West, but it's heritage, so it's great. It was actually formed and intended with a purpose to serve the residents of these respective states that were not participating in their existing systems of higher education or institutions of higher education. Just this recognition that the majority of, in fact, their adults who needed education, the acquisition of knowledge, skill, and ability to participate more in the workforce, did not have avenues to enroll in and persist through and complete the programs that would help them change their lives for the better. And so they invested in creating a private nonprofit institution of higher education. It was also focused on ensuring that those educational pathways were relevant to the world of work. So you'll see today, we have still today 4 primary fields. In business and in health, in education, and in technology. We're actually expanding that portfolio in the coming years here, and we'll introduce those in the future. But today, we serve over about 200,000 full-time students today. But last year, I think we served about 350,000 unique individuals. But most notably, the fun fact I like to share of this last year that just ended in June 30th, we graduated over 59,000 individuals, and that was more people graduated that year than we had enrolled 10 years prior. And so we're quite happy about that. I think as a quick profile, like our mission is fundamentally to change lives for the better by creating pathways to opportunity. If you were to look at the most common denominator that exists across all the individuals that we serve, they're working adults. They're individuals from 18 years old to 60 years old. The median age is about 34 today. The median age of our graduates is about 36. It's those individuals for whom the traditional model that we all think of in higher ed wasn't really accessible. And so that's what we've focused on.
I think it's a unique model in higher education. Always enjoy hearing about it. So there's a lot changing in the world of higher ed and also in the world of work. And there are all these big underlying forces that are evolving. And they're changing sort of how people perceive the value of education, the value of skills and credentials. Can you talk a little bit about what you're seeing and what are some of those big forces that are changing the pipeline there?
Yeah, certainly, and this has even been true for WGU. I think that WGU and just how we do what we do, we have benefited from technology. And my sense is that we would be heads in the sand if we ignored the generational impact that now artificial intelligence is the most advanced kind of technology that we're experiencing, is what it's going to do for the world of work the same way the internet digitized processes and practices beginning 25, 30 years ago. And that there's a good study, I think, by Price Waterhouse, excuse me, that highlighted that skills in, if you will, AI-affected fields, that they're changing at like 65, 70%, a rate of 65 to 70%. And the study, I think, tried to highlight that in 2025, that pace of change was even 2.5 times faster than just a year ago. And so if you think about that as a predominant force right now that's significantly shifting how quickly the skills that are required in the workforce, but we're still working with an educational or talent development model that is moving like at a snail's pace. Quite frankly, most faculty-centered institutions, like you probably haven't seen the curriculum change in the last 10 years. We're still teaching pretty standard stuff. And I even found it amusing one time where I was working with a marketing professor, and they were debating basically introducing a degree in digital marketing, and I'm just like, isn't all marketing today digital? But that was like the innovative thing that they thought. It was like, oh no, we got to have a new degree. I'm like, I think that's just marketing today, that it's just digital. But I think that's our challenge. Now, you can't also ignore the fact that the nature of those jobs are also being influenced across sectors differently. And so earlier today, I think we saw about the number of students that are in K-12. We're the largest teachers college in the country. But that space, while you don't have more students going into it, you have a significant shift in what's happening and what needs to occur in the classroom. And you also have a rapidly retiring population of teachers. So the demand for more teachers that are AI fluent is also going way up, even if the number of students to be served isn't dramatically changing. But then if you look at healthcare, you're now seeing that integrated care or value-based healthcare, where you have more of a comprehensive care of an individual, is also changing the dynamics of what healthcare looks like. And so how do you design and develop talent development or educational pathways that are relevant to those skills? And then you can also look at the fields of like technology. What's interesting there is the undercurrent of industry certifications as being now the industry currency of value rather than a degree. It's like you'll sooner get a job with the right industry certifications than you will with just a bachelor's degree and none of those certifications. And so you see that changing the technology field significantly. So I think this is all to say that if education truly is to be a catalyst for changing someone's life for the better, then it has to be relevant to the world of work. And the world of work, regardless of all the political climate or the other broader, shifts that are happening across nations, and regardless of those, is like it's just changing more quickly today than it was before, and our educational outcomes have to do a better job of keeping pace with those.
I think, when I think about the labor market, we live in it's a free market system. There's a sort of assumption that the invisible hand will figure, through the invisible hand and these signals that get sent between employers, education providers, workers, prospective workers, students, that they'll kind of like work out. But given the pace of change that you're talking about, and I see this too, I just think, the need for employers to adapt and educators and workers to adapt more quickly is really critical. And so I'm curious, as a school that's designing programs that are hopefully responsive to what employers are looking for, how do you think about that? Sort of divining what employers want. Some of it is divining it, some of it is speaking directly with them. Figuring out what it is that employers want, changing quickly with your curricula, and also then, and I'm also curious on the side of how do individuals in the workforce, in the labor force, figure out like, oh, okay, this is the direction I need to go in with my career?
Yeah, WGU, I think we try to pride ourselves on the fact that we work really closely with subject matter experts from the large employers in the specific sectors, and we did that through program advisory councils. We certainly have 250 employer partnerships across the country that both are advancing their employees as students at WGU, but hiring our graduates. But what we're noticing today is where they were influencing our program design is like we can augment our capacity for change or increasing the alignment or keeping pace, if you will, with the learning outcomes with the change by utilizing AI, by also utilizing partners like Lightcast and others that simply says, hey, a human can't keep track of all the changes that are happening on a daily, monthly, or even quarterly basis in terms of new skills that start to surface in the role descriptions for which employers are hiring, but AI can. And so what AI has allowed us to do is that we now instead of like 5 to 10 subject matter experts that from the workforce and employers that are working with our curriculum and instructional faculty, we're now able to augment that with another 100 to 200 subject matter experts, because now we can utilize a more crowdsourced approach to it to get all the different inputs as to the skills that are required in the roles that they're hiring. And so you then augment that with Lightcast, who's also surfacing all the different broad skill sets. And next thing you know, you can create a really interesting skills graph that, instead of saying, oh, I got to have 200 learning outcomes, you start to realize, like, actually these 50 are the most important, and then these next 50 are the most important. And these other 50 that you thought were learning outcomes, they're now superfluous. They're like showing up on a random role description once in 200 jobs, et cetera. And so you can drop those things from your learning outcomes pretty quickly. Now, having said that, one of the benefits that we have at WGU is that we're a master curriculum, meaning that what our instructional designers, our curriculum faculty, they're the ones who are responsible for designing and develop that curriculum. They develop it at a pace that, wholesale, the degree, if you will, that's changing over in no less than 3 years. Like, it's typically changing over a really high rate, because you're now surfacing all those changes in the workforce on a quarterly basis, and it can immediately be factored back into the content, the curriculum traverse, the assessments that we design. You have to be really, really quick at that, and when we change it, it affects all of the students, not just one faculty member of a class of 30 students. Like, oh no, it'll affect all 5,000 that are enrolled in that program. That, for us, I think, is a good way to utilize technology to try to keep pace with the curriculum design, to ensure that what individuals are learning is going to be relevant to what they're pursuing. The one thing that's certain today is that I believe in that phrase that someone else has coined, is that it's not AI that's going to take your job, but an AI-fluent individual is going to take your job. And I've already seen that today in someone who's a non-degreed individual who's relatively junior in terms of age and higher ed, but they're just by their own accord or their own gumption, they're learning the capacity and capability of AI quite quickly, such that their skill set is advancing faster than the curriculum can teach them. And so that AI fluency sometimes is also the autodidacts are developing that skill faster than the faculty who are supposedly teaching AI fluency. It's, I joke about it as like, I highly, highly doubt that any of you ever read a manual for operating your smartphone. Well, no one's actually getting a manual for how to utilize ChatGPT either. You just start using it, and you start exploring all the new ways in which you can use it, and then it gets more and more complicated. Next thing you know, like, your student is way more fluent in it than you, the faculty, are. And so how are you going to try to keep pace with how quickly individuals are, developing their capabilities? That's the challenge. I mean, to me, that's exciting. I think even employers could be excited, because their employers are going to start figuring out how to do their jobs differently faster than they can train them to do their jobs differently.
Yeah. My 13-year-old son is my manual for my iPhone, so yeah, he
there
fixes
you
it
go.
all the time for me.
That's the version of, like, instead of an AI bot, you actually have a human bot that's like your smartphone co-pilot. Yeah.
A college degree no longer guarantees a job, or at least that's kind of a big message that is getting out there. The Wall Street Journal, my paper, is writing those stories about how kids are graduating from college and they're facing a really difficult job market. It's not the golden ticket that it once was. And I think, there is a broader sense, not just from college graduates, a feeling of economic pessimism. And we had a story about this last week that has just stayed with me. A feeling that people don't know how to get ahead. And I think that is as much a sense of pessimism as it is a confusion about how to get ahead. And I think that is about this pace of change being so quick. So I am curious, like, how do we communicate a lot of this to prospective students in terms of, like, what they're going to need? I don't know. I mean, Google, as far as I can tell, is the #1 career coach out there. When I talk to people and I say, "Oh, how did you find this program that you decided to invest in?" Often it's, "Well, I Googled, and this was close to me, or the price was right, or whatever." So yeah, I'm curious, like, how do you communicate? How does Western Governors communicate with prospective students to prepare them for what it is they're going to be needing? I know you said often they're coming in knowing more than we may give them credit for, but.
Yeah, to emphasize, I think the question that you're asking too is in a recent newsletter that I published online, I highlighted a research study from, I think, Schultz Family Foundation, and they had a partner in doing it, but it highlights some of the data that also was in Axios today, that in fact, sure enough, those rising graduates or now graduates actually are quite pessimistic about their job prospects. And they may have had to apply it to 4 times as many jobs before to even get an offer versus even just a year or 2 years ago. But the contrast in the study was highlighting that some 70+% of employers said they have ample good jobs. And so I was trying to resolve this disconnect because, like, why are the employers thinking they have plenty of great jobs, but then the providers of talent are saying there's no good jobs? And the answer is, I think, is that it's a skills gap problem, which is the employers are saying, I have plenty of good jobs, but the individuals who are applying for those jobs don't actually have the skills. So I actually have a skill gap. Having said that, at WGU, we are probably certainly one of the institutions that are at the frontier of transitioning from a course-based or a credential-based talent currency to a skills currency, in the sense that you have to truly understand what are the knowledge, skill, and ability that you've acquired as a result of the credential and the learning that you've gone through. Because that world of work is looking more at those skills as the measures of competency than it is at the credential, especially if it's a blunt force thing like a degree. This is why in technology I mentioned why industry certifications are more important than a degree often, because the industry certifications are a specific verification that you possess the skills that I need in that job. So if you have this CompTIA certification, this NICE certification, whatever else it is, cloud certification, AI one, that's actually a better signal that you possess the skills. So what we've done at WGU is we invested in our achievement wallet. Our achievement wallet is basically a skills-based learning and employment record. It allows the individual to effectively provide a skills-based transcript of everything that they have competency in at their different degrees of competency. That basically says, I can now provide to an employer all the actual skills that I've been verified competent in. And if you also want to know my credential, that's on there too, but it's mostly in the skills. What it also affords them is they can look at all of the jobs that are, and the skills required in those jobs, and see where there's a match between the skills they possess and the jobs that are out there that require those skills, that they may already be a great match for. And connecting even to where in your geolocation, which employers are having those jobs, and here's how you can apply, and it'll produce a resume for you, and you can now actually signal to that employer that you possess the verified competency in the skills necessary for that job. But more importantly, it also surfaces to them, here's all the skills required for the jobs that you want, and here are all the gaps that you have. And now how do I start solving those gaps? Well, here's the credentials you could pursue at WGU. Here's other internships you could pursue, et cetera. There's many ways by which you can develop the competency in those skills that now gives you not just a Google search result, but a Google map answer to how do you get from where you are to where you want to be. Now that's working great for the roughly 300,000 plus that students at WGU and some of our current graduates that utilize it. But we even have 400,000 plus alumni that we need to expand that to. But in reality, you need to expand that to 160 million individuals in the US workforce, because until you have that skills denominated way, it's really hard for an individual to say, how am I going to navigate from where I am to where I want to be? And the job market has done a better job of articulating the skills that are needed in roles, but we haven't done a great job of identifying and be clear about the pathways now to get from where you are to have those skills to be ready for those jobs, especially in higher ed, because higher ed just says, well, we have a degree in these majors. We don't know what jobs those align to, but you figure that out on your own. You're like, they didn't take up that as part of their mantra, at least historically. So it's promising, but we're only at the very, very early stages of the adoption life cycle of something like that, I believe. But WGU is trying to do that, so.
And that gets to this question of the return on investment on education, which has been a big topic of discussion for at least a few years and probably longer. What is at stake for higher education institutions?
Their very existence. I mean, I think that there's so many reasons to reinvent higher education. The cost is just one of those. But the matter of fact is that if those holding these degrees are now even less readied or less aligned with the skills required in the workforce, there's a real question of whether you have the outcome to begin with. Second, the cost of that is now the average in the US is $100,000 to complete it. Third, that doesn't include the opportunity cost, because if it's taking you more than 4 years to complete that credential, you start going like, well, that's 4 years you're not working, you know. And if it's taking you 5 years to finish a bachelor's degree that should only take 4 max, like you have real costs associated with that. And then you have the other data that shows from Burning Glass Institute that, you know, 40% of college graduates are underemployed. I mean, they took jobs that they didn't need the degree for in the first place. Like, I think what that means is for the higher ed system as a whole, not to mention, by the way, only 60% of those who start complete, you're like, it probably suggests the whole model of it is really at risk. I think that has been the underpinning of the policy model of accountability, to say, you know, if there's 2 scams in higher education, it's students who start and don't complete, and it's credentials and no market value. And now you're basically saying, you as an institution are going to be held accountable for that, and if your economic model doesn't actually deliver the economic value add for the student, you're going to have a tough time maintaining your existence. My sense is that you'll get kind of this barbell effect that will happen in the industry, that you'll have, you know, certain institutions that have substantial endowments or funding, you know, flagship state institutions, or you'll have the large private nonprofits, et cetera, that have the kind of their position. And then you'll have targeted specialized institutions on the other end. And if you're kind of in the no man's land and you don't have a really clear economic value add for the students that you serve and a self-sustaining financial model, like, it's going to be tough to sustain your enrollment and continue to operate if you haven't figured that out. So you know, it'll be interesting to watch whether the pace of closures accelerates or not.
How do you think WGU will look different in a few years? I think when we spoke earlier, you said you were always looking for what's the WGU killer.
Yeah.
And how do you avoid it?
Yeah. And maybe there's, you know, 2 ways to think about that. Is that we kind of, how do we leverage technology to accelerate the innovation that in the areas that we're already good at today, but we're also trying to invent the completely de novo kind of WGU 2.0 model, because we think that is, when I say a WGU killer in that phrase, is like, well, WGU as you know it today is like, that may not even exist in 10 years from now. Like, there'll be a wholly new version of WGU. I suspect that the most significant thing that we'll actually invest in the next 5-10 years will be, how do you leverage technology that's available to us today, big data, machine learning, artificial intelligence, agentic AI. Like, how do you leverage those things to dramatically personalize instruction and learning? The reason we're so focused on that is because every individual has the innate capacity for learning, and it's our job to adapt to them so that we, in fact, increase the probability that regardless of who you are, your background, everything else, you have an equal probability of success at WGU. The journey you go through and the instruction you gain and the learning and the content you use, like, may not at all look like the next person, but regardless, we've adapted to you so that both of you can demonstrate the inherent worth and capacity for learning that you have, and we've figured out how to help you traverse through that such that we'll see a step function improvement in terms of access and completion outcomes at WGU. Now, there is the also de novo approach, which just says, you know, will degrees exist in the 2.0 version? Will, you know, our faculty model exist the same way? Mentoring, how will it look differently? But when you think of an AI native institution, that's what I think of as, like, are we also investing in that de novo kind of creation in an AI native world? Yes. Because WGU version that you see today, it was an internet native or digitally native one. And that's been amazing, and it's still growing. What I don't know is, did we reach that, like, apex of growth, or are we now reaching the apex of adoption to where, like, oh, that's already beginning its decline, and how do we create the new one that I would hope that in 5-10 years, we've figured out with our current model and leveraging all the technology that we've effectively eliminated attainment gaps across all personas, while at the same time create a wholly new institution that now has dramatically expanded access to all those learners who aren't even participating in the WGU model.
Modest goals. I do want to leave a few minutes for questions, but one last thing I wanted to ask you. I mean, so what do you want the audience to take away from this? I would say number one is don't put your head in the sand. Get your head out of the sand and watch what's going on. But what else?
I think the biggest thing I always try to say is, like, I would want everyone to recognize that individuals are the primary beneficiary of everything that we do in education. Is that if you can focus more and more of the innovation that you're driving to deliver value to students as the primary beneficiary. If we want to bring about the change in the workforce and our society broadly, it's like you have to start with changing the life of the individual. But most institutions haven't put them at the center of everything that they do. And so that's the first thing I would say is, like, just put all of the emphasis on how do you dramatically improve the value for the student. The second thing I would say is technology is your friend. There's this weird, I've been at WGU almost 10 years now, and I was just thinking when I first started, this weird kind of assumption that's made in higher ed that somehow it's immune to the benefits and effects of technology. And I just found that kind of laughable coming from private sector. I was like, really? I'm like, what is it about that technology, like technology is your friend. You really should be thinking about how do you leverage all the capabilities that technology affords and invent new ways of which you're doing things. The last thing I would say is, like, question convention like crazy. I mean, it just seems to me like not being in higher ed, it was fun for me to kind of even pretend to be an education historian, and I had to learn why we have the things that we have, and then start asking, is like, does that even make sense? Like credit hour and shared governance and, you know, professional degrees, or even a degree that's 120 credits, like those things, you're like, why do we have all those? And the reasons we have them, are they still the reasons we should have them? And I don't think they are. So that's
I think
fun.
we might be being told we're about done. Although my clock here says 3 minutes.
So, yeah.
I think we have time for one or two questions if somebody has one, if we can ignore the bell. Or we can let you line up for the bathrooms early. Oh, question.
I asked you this question 5 years ago at our launch. More common. Where do businesses or companies have responsibility to enable those students coming out of college to be able to be employable and workable to get those skills? Because it sounds like, I mean, to me personally, having a son in college, going through this issue right now, like, am I employable, right? After he's like struggling. And I recall a day where companies, when I was in finance, they actually took me and they trained me to get my Series 7 in various degrees when I was actually working in that area of finance many years ago. So is there responsibility by companies?
Cancel your reservations, no more hesitations.
Sorry, just to repeat the question was, do employers also have a responsibility to prepare young people or to prepare people for jobs?
To a point. I think there is the expectation that in the spot market for labor, if you will, that the individuals in that market are already possessing skills that have readied them to be, you know, contributing individuals as employees in their respective organizations. Having said that, I think what employers are now finding today is that the things that they had to, if you will, top off, that maybe 20 or 25% of the skills that were needed, the percentage of what they need to top off seems to be getting bigger. And that if they're now expected to train individuals to how to be AI fluent in the particular task activities of a role, is like, you're asking a lot of an employer. But if the individuals don't come with that, the employers are going to start investing more in it. What is notable that you could argue that employers, you might see an age of employers in education, because you've certainly seen in healthcare where they outright acquire nursing colleges because they're just like, I got to secure my skilled workforce, and I'm investing that more and more. You certainly see this from the likes of Walmart, Amazon, others, that are just going like, I can't rely upon those degree holders anymore to be ready for this, so we're going to invest more and more in the educational pathways. But that's different than just the training you got for 2 to 4 weeks as you started your job. I just don't think that 2 to 4 weeks is sufficient for the employers anymore, that they're investing in it more. So, but that to Lauren's earlier question, to me, that's another threat to the economic model of post-secondary institutions. So.
All right, we're officially out of time. So thank you so much for being here, and thanks, Scott, for the conversation.
Thank you, Lauren.